Welcome back, Sweet Chris here. In this video, I'm going to be covering the top 5 most commonly used workflow features, also known as workflow actions. And for each action, I'm going to be showing an example of a workflow to give some context of when you might use this feature. And keep in mind, while I will be showing them mostly in isolation, you can use these things in conjunction. So there's nothing stopping you from utilizing many different features together to build a more complex workflow to fit your exact requirements. Now, I am assuming if you're watching this video, you've already watched the video I did where I actually walk through how workflows work. I go through all the different settings. I show you exactly how to make both a single state workflow as well as a multi-state approval workflow. So I'm assuming you've checked out that video. If you haven't, please check out the link I have on that to make sure that you have that familiarity so that in this video, I can really just show you these workflows as they exist and give you the context of how you would use these. So let's get into this. All right, so I'm here in a workflow, and the first thing I'm going to show you is how to use the set field value action. And the context for this example is, let's say you've got a sales order and you want to take a specific field on that sales order and you want to change it to something else. Now, you could do the same action using the Suite Builder customization features, but that's for another video. Here, I'm going to show you exactly how you would do this using workflows. And in this particular example, we've got the sales order, and specifically for sales orders that have been generated off of a quote, also known as an estimate, I want to take the date that was used on that estimate, and I want to take that date and transpose it into the sales order. So it doesn't just take today's date, it links it back to that previous date and records that. So that's the scenario that we're going to be dealing with. Let's take a look at this workflow. So before we actually look at the states that we have, we're going to look at just the workflow information in general. So in this case, the record type is a sales order that we're looking at. I have it set as released. In most cases, you wouldn't necessarily want to just create a workflow and have that in released, but this is a demo account, so I don't need to worry about that. So I do have it as released so I can instantly see the results of what I'm doing. And I have it set initiation-wise, it is event-based as opposed to scheduled. And you can see down here, the events that would trigger this thing is that it is on create, on view, or update, and it has all trigger types enabled. So I'm not going to touch on every single one of these points for all the workflows because 90% of them have all the exact same settings. One of them does have different settings, and I'll point that out when I get to it. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our single state workflow. So if I click on this, we have just one action included, which is the set field value you can see down here. So if I click on that, what this field is doing is, if I scroll just to the top here, so this is going to trigger after the record submit. So let's actually just get an example of this. I have an estimate open here. So this is an estimate to the customer Ultima Technology. And you can see the date on here is for the 1st of March in 2024. So it's got some monitors that are included in the estimate to Ultima, and we have this saved estimate record. So we actually have the option to click this sales order, and let's do that. So we're now about to create this sales order tied to this original estimate. You can see we still have Ultima Technology, etc. And notice the date is still today's date. So this workflow has not gone into action yet because we have it set as triggering after the record submit. So after this sales order is actually submitted and saved as a record, that's when the date change will occur. Now, a lot of these fields I haven't done any other changes to, like I haven't set any event types, any specific context or triggers, so I'm not going to comment on those, but I did set a condition, and the condition was created from is not empty. And the reason for that is because I only want this to work for sales orders that came off of estimates. If it's a standalone sales order, I don't want this workflow getting involved. So if created from, if that field where is there a created from, meaning from an estimate, if that field is empty, then this workflow is not going to apply. It's only going to apply if that field is not empty. So if we scroll down here, this is where we see what is this thing actually doing. And it's going to take the date field, right? So that field we saw in the sales order, and it's going to replace it. Now we could replace it with a number of different things like a static value. We could do it from a field. Now that we would think might be applicable in this case because you would basically grab the estimate itself as the record and you would put the date from that. The only reason that doesn't work in this case is most likely because the fact that we had to set that condition earlier where it's not just a standalone sales order, they don't include the possibility of having an estimate as what you're joining records to. So the only way to actually execute what we're exactly trying to do is by using a formula. So the result is the same. We simply put in a formula saying that we're looking for the created from field, which is going to have that estimate that we drew this sales order from. And on that record, we're looking at the transaction date, which was that March 1st date, as opposed to the current date, which is the 21st of March. So that's all fine. We're going to hit save on that. We didn't actually change anything, so it's just making sure that we have our information correct. We're totally fine on that. So I'm going to close this, and we're actually going to go to the sales order, and I'm going to hit save on this, just to see how this workflow would actually handle this record. All right, so we get a confirmation that this transaction actually saved, and we can come to the record itself. And notice right over here, transaction date is the 1st of March. So even though it said the 21st, this workflow went into action and reset it as the estimates date. So that's your first example of a workflow. Now, before I continue, I'd like to say if you're finding this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe for future videos. And if you'd like to see more training on NetSuite specifically, check out my website. I have a link above as well as down in the description below. And on my website, I have a course that's totally free with 50 lessons specifically for new users to NetSuite. I also have courses for administrators, project managers, accountants, anyone who wants to take their Suite Foundation certification. I have a lot of content on that website, and if you're interested, do check it out. And with that, let's get back into the workflows. All right, so for this second workflow, I'm going to show you how you can add a button. And when I say a button, I simply mean just like this view button, the new state, these are all buttons that you simply click on and it does something in the background that enables some feature or it changes something on the record. They can be a great way to make things more efficient. So if you have employees that are constantly doing certain actions, instead of having them click 6 different times to just do one thing, you could have them click on a button that does that same action in the background. So that's what I'm going to show you here. In this case, the example is that we want the customer records that we have to have a button that says inactivate. So instead of going through into customer records, having to go into edit mode, go to, if I show you a customer record here for Ultima, we have to go all the way to system information, go down here, click inactivate, resave the record, etc. Instead of doing that, we simply want this inactivate button right at the top. You click it, it makes the record inactive. The way we would do that is, first off, our workflow is dealing just with customer records. And we have this first state, which has one action, which is add button. So if we click on that, this is all relatively the defaults for this type of thing. We are triggering it before the record loads. So as soon as the customer record loads, it already has the button on it. And if we scroll down here, we simply see that its name is inactivate. That's all you're doing. You're adding the button. We haven't said it does anything yet. So if we close these, we can now go to the transition. We're simply saying that to go to the next state, you have to execute by clicking the inactivate button. So every time you click that button, you're going to get moved to the second state. And the second state is where we actually say what this button's going to do. And we have a set field value here where we specify that the field inactive, which I just showed you here, right? This checkbox down here, we want that to be set statically as checked. So it's going to be considered inactive. It's just going to check that off and save the record. So it's a very simple workflow. If I come to the customer record, I can scroll up here. If we click the button, boom, it does it. We go down to system information and we now have an inactive customer record. So that can be a very handy tool. The next workflow we have features the send email tool or action. And the circumstance we're going to have here is, let's say we want to send an invoice to our customer. Now, you do have the ability, if I actually come to the customer record, and if we go down to preferences, in this case, I'm on Aqua Holdings customer. Down in preferences, we have this feature here, send transactions via email. So we could select that for a customer, and just by creating an invoice record, it would automatically send an email to that customer notifying them about the fact that they have this invoice. So that happens just as a native feature in NetSuite, but we want to add the ability to send it not just to their normal email, which is what you see here, this info@aqua.com, but we want the ability to send it to a different email. Down here, we have this customer invoice email, which is payables@aqua.com. So in this particular case, the customer has their own email, and they also have an email specifically to receive invoices and bills. So that's what we want to send to, and we're going to use this send email action. So if we come over to the workflow, first off, this workflow is dealing with invoices specifically. Obviously, that's relevant. And if we click on the single workflow, we have this send email action. So let's click on that. Now, it's really straightforward, nothing fancy here. It is going to trigger after record submit. So it's only after the invoice is actually saved as a record that it's going to send this email out. And the only other thing I changed on here at the top was the event types. I limited it to create and edit, because I want it to be when an invoice is first created or modifications are made to that invoice before an email gets sent. I don't necessarily want other activities to generate an email unnecessarily, so I limited it in that case. And if we come at the bottom here, we've got a few different parameters about how this email is going to work, specifically who's the email going to come from. You could set it from a field, and that would be pretty common. For example, on the current record, I could set it to the sales rep. So the sales rep that the customer is familiar with, that's where the email is going to come from. But in this particular case, I want to say that I've got one person in my organization that just always sends these invoices out, and that's Abby. So I'm simply going to select Abby Kwan as the kind of hard-coded person it comes from. Now, in terms of the content of the email, I could dictate that in this email right here, but I'm going to utilize a template to just take advantage of that. The template is going to be sent out. It's got its own dynamic fields to provide the necessary information to the customer. And then in terms of recipient, we have, again, we could just say specific recipients, but for the sake of this, we would want to have it from the field, looking at that customer record, and then getting it from the customer invoice email, which is what I showed you here. Not this email, but the customer invoice email specifically. We could check any field on here, but that one's the relevant one for this particular workflow. So if I come to the invoice itself, you can see that this is the invoice with Aqua Holdings for $500. And once this thing is actually saved as a record, that email will go to their payables email account. Of course, that's not a real email account, so I can't actually show you how that would work, but it's simply you'd hit save, and then on the recipient end of that email, the invoice based on the template that I had sent would be sent to that Aqua Holdings email. So let's go on to the next workflow. If I click here, so in this workflow, I want to show you the transform record action. And the circumstance is going to be that a sales order has been created, and as it goes through the fulfillment, in other words, we've actually sent this item out to the customer, we need to generate the invoice and actually bill the customer. Now, usually that's done by an AR clerk, but in this case, I want to set up a workflow so it happens automatically. So let's actually first, before we get into the workflow, let's kind of visualize this. I have a sales order that's already created here, and you can see this is to Ultima Technology for $3,500. So this is just a standard sales order, and it's currently pending fulfillment. So we actually need to send them this item. So let's do that first. We're going to hit fulfill. It brings us to this item fulfillment record. We could go through this information, but it draws it all from that sales order. So we can just hit save on that. All right, so now we're able to mark this item fulfillment as packed. So in the warehouse, we've actually packed it up, and we can now mark it as shipped. We send it out to the customer. At this point, now you could click bill on this item fulfillment record to, again, take it over to the next step, but we actually want to come back to the sales order that started this all. So we'll click on this sales order link down here, and it brings us back to the sales order. And the reason I brought you back here is because I want to show you that this sales order, right, we went to the item fulfillment, but now we're checking back on the sales order. The status of the sales order is now pending billing, right? Because the next status is to bill and send an invoice to that customer. Once this sales order is in this state, this is when we want to have this workflow that automatically takes all sales orders that are pending billing, and we want to send invoices to those clients and transform them into the invoice record. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to come over to workflows, and this workflow, the settings are a little different than the ones I've just shown you. So the record is with a sales order, so that's pretty straightforward. But instead of setting it as an event base where as soon as something happens, it triggers this workflow and you can immediately see the results, I instead put it on scheduled. So the way this is going to work is every 30 minutes, which you can see down here, this thing is going to search the system using a saved search, which I'm going to show you in a second. And if anything fits the parameters of that saved search, in other words, these sales orders, if it finds, let's say, 5 sales orders that fit the parameters, it's going to take those and it's going to put them through this workflow. The one additional thing I need to show you on that is that the release status is testing. Now, all the other ones I showed you were set as released, meaning they happen immediately. But because this is got a 30-minute window, it only happens every 30 minutes, I don't want to sit here waiting for that to happen. So I set it to testing, which gives me the ability to execute it on demand so I can show you that it's working. And the next thing I'm going to show you is the save search itself, so you can see what are we looking for in the first place. So I'm going to come over here to this save search. And this is one that I created for the purposes of this example. So the main line, basically we're looking for, the main line is true, and we're looking for sales orders that have the status of pending billing. And then I put a date time limiter just so I don't get all these unnecessary sales orders, just the ones that I have more recently. So with these parameters of this save search, if we come back to that workflow, you can see that save search is included here. So the workflow knows that that's what it's using as its criteria. And the workflow itself, if we come over to this state just has this one action, which is transform record. And if we click on that, we can see it's basically triggering upon the entry of this sales order. Again, I don't have a lot of other features up here, but you can see down here, all that this thing is telling it to do is, because we know we're dealing with sales order records and we're saying transform from a sales order to an invoice. And that's really the simplicity of it. Now, the way we can check if this thing is working is we actually can come to the workflow over here and I can hit edit on it. And when I do that, it allows me to change the parameters of the workflow. And because I have it in testing mode, I have the ability to, I've got this button here, execute now. So I can click on that. And it's basically going to run this workflow. So now I can come over here, and if I go to that actual sales order, so now as a result of this workflow going, this sales order should have the status of billed. So I'm going to refresh the record until we get that status appear. And just like that, we can see that it is now billed. So the invoice was generated as a result. And of course, it changed this record to reflect the fact that it has now been properly billed. Now for the last workflow I'm going to show you, we're going to click here. Of course, if I'm going to go over the top 5 most commonly used workflows, the king of workflows is really the approval workflow. That's hands down the most commonly used. I did show a multi-state approval workflow in my prior video, which again, you should check that out if you haven't already. I have a very similar style of workflow that I showed in that video here, so I'm not going to rehash it too much, but I added one additional factor that I want to show you to make it a little more realistic for this circumstance. So just to give kind of an overview on what we're looking at here, this is an approval workflow so that any purchase orders that are generated, basically if the purchase order is under a certain amount, I think it's about $150 in this example, it can just immediately be approved as a purchase order, but anything above that amount has to go to the person's supervisor for approval. And what I specifically added to this workflow that I didn't have in the other video is send email to make it a little more realistic so that not only is the supervisor responsible for approving this thing, but also an email will go out to the supervisor so that they're aware that they need to approve this purchase order and move it on. So let's just take a look at the kind of basic concept of what this workflow is doing. First off, it is for purchase orders. So that's pretty straightforward. We're going to go to this first state, which is pending approval. And there's a few different things going on here. So I added buttons. There's going to be an approve button, a reject button, and of course the approval status, the field that shows the approval status. We don't want people able to tinker or just employees to change it to approved if they want to. So that one's set as disabled. And in fact, it's also hidden. So you're not even going to see it on the purchase order. So the employees can't tinker around with that in any way. And of course, there's the send email action. And you can actually see right here that this email is going to be going to the users, in other words, the employee that's creating this purchase order, that person's supervisor. On his employee record, he will have a supervisor listed. That's the field that it's going to know they need to send the email out to. And it's got the email starts with hello world, just a demo email that I made. And then when we go to condition, it also basically specifies that the condition, this is only relevant if the employee has a supervisor. Obviously, if it's like the CEO or someone who doesn't have any supervisor listed, then they don't need to get supervisor approval. So those are the actions for pending approval. And then to go to an approved state, there's 2 ways to get there. Either one, The amount has to be less than $150, in which case it's just immediately approved and you don't need to get any kind of supervisor approval. The second option, or transition type, is to click the approve button. And if we take a look at a purchase order here, you can see I've added these two approve and reject buttons. So the supervisor would come to the record, they'd hit approve or reject to be able to move it forward. If we come back to the workflow, the approval status or approved status, if we double click on that, so it does two things. The first thing is as soon as you get to this state, it changes the field value for approval status. It changes it to approved because obviously that's the current situation. It also locks the record so that now that you have a purchase order that is approved, someone can't come in and just start making changes, maybe up the amount, etc. So it's locked off. We've also added the do not exit workflow so that it stops at this point in the workflow and it doesn't have the ability to, for example, loop back into the beginning and kind of recreate the process. There's instances where you would want to do that. If, for example, on a reject, you'd want them to be able to make modifications and resubmit it, but we're not going to have that on this particular workflow. And then the reject status is basically if you click the reject button, it goes to this reject state. Approval status field is set as rejected, and then the record is locked off. So again, this is a relatively simple example of an approval status. You can get much more elaborate. You can add additional conditions. So for example, if you wanted two different departments to have to approve a purchase order at the same time before that thing can move on, you could set up all of these different arrangements. You could have the ability to take a reject and put it back through the line with a modified purchase order. All of these different things are possible, just taking these basic concepts and extrapolating them out to whatever your requirements need. And that's it for this workflows video. I hope you found this helpful. And if you'd like to see me go over a specific type of workflow, just let me know down in the comments below. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.